Intensive therapy is a different kind of therapy. It's really best used for trauma because trauma is something that has happened in the past and is now over. For that reason, we're able to go in with modalities like EMDR and clear the charge of that trauma that's already happened. Instead of needing to do that in an ongoing weekly basis, an hour a week, over a number of months or even years, with intensive therapy, we're able to go in all at once and process through all of the trauma to enable somebody to move on into full healing in their life. A good analogy for that is if something were wrong with your car. We'll say that you had 4 bald tires on your car and you took it into the mechanic, and the mechanic let you know that they'd fix 1 tire today, bring it in again the next week, they'd fix the next tire that time, bring it in week 3 and they'd fix another tire for you, and then by week 4 you'd have 4 fully functioning tires. They just hoped that you'd be okay in the meantime driving on those bald tires. We do that sometimes with therapy, and sometimes that's necessary. It can be necessary for a variety of reasons, but other times it's not necessary, and an intensive is a way to get all of those tires fixed at once, to clear out all of that charge from all of those trauma memories so that a person is freed up to safely and healthily live their life in the way that they were meant to. Intensives can take a variety of time. They can take as little as 3 days, as many as 10 days. 5 is really the average amount of days, but a lot of the length of time is going to depend on 2 important factors. One is your trauma history. What traumas and traumatic losses have you experienced in your life that you're looking for healing from? And the second is actually about what we call your attachment history, which is your history of significant attachment relationships in life, and whether or not those are going to support and help the intensive process or potentially hinder it and make it a little bit more complicated. We can figure that out at an intake appointment. I spend 2 hours at an intake appointment so that we can really thoroughly explore both the trauma history and the attachment history. It's important to really spend that length of time so that we can predict well how long your intensive might be. A lot of people ask me about the results of an intensive. For example, will I be cured after an intensive? So it's important to know that an EMDR intensive is there to process your history of trauma. Actually, train tracks are a little bit of a good example of what trauma processing is like. We get on the train and we journey through your life. We stop at each point where there's been a significant trauma or traumatic loss in your life, and we process that. And as we process it, we clear that charge so that you don't have to revisit those stops on the train route ever again. But it's also really important to know when you board a train, where are you going? What's your destination? So a lot of times, well, every time, at the beginning of an intensive, we sit down and really talk about what matters to you. What do you want your life to look like after this intensive? Many people, after they've experienced a trauma, have built a lot of things around them in life to help them to feel safe, to help them to feel control, that aren't really serving them well anymore. Everything from disruption in relationships or jobs to things like addiction or other maladaptive coping have sometimes been built up around the experience of trauma. And in the intensive, we'll clear that trauma, the experience of trauma, so that the person can then be free to make healthy choices for what they'd like the rest of their life to look like. The intensive is not going to magically give us that. It's not going to magically give us a healthy, happy life, but it can give us the freedom from trauma so that we have the space to create that life ourselves. Dreaming about that life together, visualizing what it could look like together is an important part of our work together. And it's exactly why I love being a trauma therapist. I love helping people imagine what their life could look like free from trauma, and then having the space from trauma to be able to build the resources to have that life. I hope that you'll consider a trauma therapy intensive, and I'd love to walk with you on this journey to be free from your trauma and to find that healing.